We've got 7 different stories from 7 news outlets, guys. This is the news round. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with episode 2 of Newsround. And the headline for the first article we're going to be looking at is from The Guardian of income of Labour and Lib Dems up as Tories funds fall, the accounts show. The newly revealed figures seem to show embedding financial support for the Conservatives. So it'll be interesting to look at the numbers. I think this isn't really too much of a surprise for us, given the circumstances that the state of the United Kingdom is in as a whole. And people are losing faith in the Conservative Party. They don't see the Conservatives looking to change, to bring the country, the nation forward for the better, and people have lost faith in that. So Labour and the Liberal Democrats both recorded an increase of their incomes last year, primarily from donations, while funds in the Conservative coffers fell. According to new release accounts, which appear to show ebbing financial support from the Tories, Labour have received an income for the year to end of December that was more than 50% higher than the Conservatives, totalling 47.2 million for Keir Starmer's party, compared to just over 30.5 million for Rishi Sunak. So they've gained quite a significant amount of chunk of money from a number of factors, which we'll get into. The Liberal Democrats have had an income of just 6 million at 4.2 million, and the Scottish National Party's income fell, with the number of donations almost halving from 2021 at a tricky time for the party. It's interesting that they've had almost half in the amount of donations to the SNP. That's an interesting one. But £6 million from the Liberal Democrats is a mighty contrast in comparison to the Conservatives and Labour there. But still, 6 million is still a lot of money, obviously. The Conservatives' account showed that the party spent over 2 million more than it earned during 2022, with total spending of just over £33 million. During the same period, donations, which are traditionally the Tories' major source of income, fell by slightly more than this deficit, from 20.5 million to 18.1 million. So not too much of a loss really, but still they're still getting major benefactors there. The Conservatives, which you would kind of hope there would be a bit more pulling away from it, considering the state of the United Kingdom. But Labour's income is more of a mixture of membership revenue, money from affiliates such as trade unions, and donations. Slightly from the first two fell between 2021 and 2022, but donations increased slightly, while wider commercial income increased by more than 1 million. So trade unions, obviously, donations, money from membership revenues, all that kind of stuff. So they're getting a mixture of all sorts, Labour there. Labour, which says in its accounts was preparing for a general election expected next year, recorded a surplus of nearly 3 million. The party has cut back on staff, with the accounts showing that its running costs fell from 40.7 million in 2021 to 34.8 million a year later. Why would you cut back on staffing at a time when you're looking like you're pushing ahead? Doesn't feel right to me, but it's never a good deal when people are losing out. For the Lib Dems, whose profile has been raised by a series of by-election wins, total income increased only marginally, but within this, the money from donations rose from 1.9 million to 2.9 million. That's still a lot of money, you know. That's still good for the Lib Dems. In contrast, the SNP's donations incomes half, from just under 700,000 in 2021 to about 350,000 last year. The party is heavily reliant on membership income, which dropped slightly, but still brought in more than 2.2 million of the 4.2 million in total. It's a pretty all right money for the Lib Dems, Lib Dems for the SNP there. So it's not as bad as it initially looked for the SNP, but maybe you guys from Scotland can let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. The SNP accounts show an overall loss of more than 800,000, its second biggest deficit ever recorded, and the second largest of the main UK political parties last year. The party's Treasury Stuart MacDonald blamed the drop in membership on the cost of living crisis. Police Scotland are conducting an investigation into the handling of £600,000 in donations earmarked for a second independent referendum. The SNP had conducted an urgent search for auditors after it emerged in March that the party had been without accountants for months. In fact, a fact that Hamar Yusuf said that he discovered only when he became leader. The firm that submitted the account, AMS Accountants Group, issued an unusual health warning. Some original documentation for cash and cheques received by memberships, donations and raffle income had not been kept from by the party. The accounts cover all of UK parties with an annual income and expenditure of at least 250,000, of which there are 19. One of them, a far-right Britain's First Party, failed to file its accounts on time and had been given an extended deadline. Amongst other parties, the Greens in England and Wales recorded a slight rise of income to 3.1 million, while Plaid Cymru dropped marginally but remained near 1 million. So the Greens have received an income of 3.1 million there. Interesting. I'm surprised there's not a bit of more of a boost, but interesting to say the least. Reclaim, the hard right-led group led by actor Lawrence Fox, had an income of 716,000 from all donations, well down on the 1.8 million it received the year before. This is quite interesting. So that people are losing faith in the Reform Party from the looks of it there. The Reform UK, the successor to Nigel Farage's Brexit Party, recorded a £250,000 deficit and a slightly lower income than Reclaim at 690,000, again from all donations. Interesting to say the least. These numbers here. So Reform have lost a little bit there. Green Party seems to be slightly well. Plaid Cymru, nothing too much changed there. SNP, obviously there nothing too much changing with SNP, but obviously there's the whole issue with the accountants there that had been going on. And I think in terms of Labour, Lib Dems and the Conservatives, it seems pretty interesting to say the least. That I don't think these numbers kind of surprise us, but I kind of think maybe the Conservatives were expecting to lose a little bit more. Maybe more people were looking to turn their money away, but probably a lot of it is obviously funneled in from private companies and that going behind from foreign nations or foreign businesses, where they're going through a UK firm of some sort in order to supply donations directly to the Conservative Party. There have been a lot of reports and news stories surrounding that has been for sure, guys. So it wouldn't be surprised if there was more to come with that one. And sticking with the Conservative Party a little bit more here, this is exclusive from iNews. The Tory manifesto author admits the government has failed due to chaos and inactivity. Rachel Wolf, the co-author of the 2019 manifesto, warned the public will not accept the Conservatives' failure to deliver on their promises. So you can see there on the tick boxes there: social care, failed; immigration, failed; Brexit, done; public finances, not done; tax, net zero. Yeah. The Conservatives have failed to deliver on the overarching aims of the 2019 manifesto, due in part to the chaos brought by Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, one of the authors behind the policy paper, has said. A swathe of the Tories' election promises from the year remains undelivered, and with the next election expected in the coming 12 months, Rishi Sunak's chances of meeting his party objectives have been written off. Rachel Wolf, co-author of the 2019 manifesto, said there were several mitigating factors that explained the Conservatives' failure to deliver its policy platforms, such as the pandemic and the invasion in Ukraine. There's no doubt that the pandemic and invasion in Ukraine has played a spanner in policies, but it still doesn't change the fact that many other nations have recovered from both of them. The US obviously have shown that they have recovered to a certain extent, but we have not, and it's not good at all from our point of view. And we continue to ignore the white elephant in the room, that is of course Brexit. But she warned the public would not accept the Tory government's failure to deliver the basics of the manifesto, which she blamed on the dysfunction caused by two ousted prime ministers. The world has changed since 2019. No manifesto could predict COVID, the war in or the war in Europe. Voters aren't stupid, and it would be ridiculous to expect every letter of the manifesto to be delivered in those circumstances. Mrs. Wolf, founding part of political strategy firm Public First, told AI. I think its more important question is whether the public would consider the government to have consistently and comprehensively delivered the spirit of the 2019 manifesto. Better public services in better local areas and a decent economic management. Right now, they wouldn't, in part because of the decisions of the previous two prime ministers and the simultaneous chaos that inactivity that resulted. She added, Rishi inherited an almost impossible situation. It's a tragedy, and while a lot of it was out of the hands of politicians, not all of it was. Yes, but he could have come in and done something, delivered more money to local authorities and stuff. The money is there. There's a lot of things he could have done. Rishi Sunak come in and fix a lot of problems, but he has chosen not to. That's the other thing. Having returned from his first family holiday for 4 years, Sunak has around a year to deliver what his party promised in the last general election in 2019. Here the eye looks at the government performance to date and what is still outstanding as the clock ticks down to polling day. Brexit. The manifesto was entitled Get Brexit Done, Unleash Britain's Potential, and while the Conservatives made good on their first part of the pledge, even the party's biggest cheerleaders harbours doubt over the second aspect. The UK now has sovereignty over its laws, money, trade, policy and borders, but Brexiteers remain furious at the government's failure to utilise the new UK's newfound post-Brexit freedoms and scrap existing EU laws. It's such a joke. It's such a joke, really, guys. Ah, oh, God. We talked about Brexit a number of times, guys. It's scrapping the EU laws is the most stupidest thing we could possibly do. But Mr Sunak has successfully agreed fresh post-Brexit trading arrangements to replace Mr Johnson's malfunctioning Northern Ireland Protocol. But support is far from unanimous. The PM is yet to ensure Northern Ireland has unfettered access to the rest of the UK that will allow it to enjoy full, fresh economic benefits of Brexit. Verdict has been a hit. Largely delivered, but some serious loose ends remaining. Yeah, we're suffering as a result of it. There's a lot of factors that we are suffering as a result of Brexit. You know, we got open borders when it comes to goods. We've had increase in immigration. Obviously, that's played a role in it too. We don't have the same trading benefits that Northern Ireland have as well, because they have the benefits of both the UK and the EU over there. If people travel to the EU now, it's much harder for people to go there. It's even also, not to mention, people from the European Union have had to pay out and fill in paperwork and whatnot in order to ensure their statuses of whether they're working, living, or whatever in the European Union as well. There are just tons and tons and tons of negatives to this Brexit and to being outside the European Union and outside the single customs union. There's more than enough video and content to remind you guys of that. Not just here, but many, many hundreds of thousands of YouTubers, of documents and stories out there that speaks volumes about the damage that Brexit is causing. Public finances. The manifesto pledged not to borrow funding day-to-day spending, while it also promises to have debt lower at the end of the Parliament than at the start. Both pledges have had to be abandoned as a result of the pandemic, while the energy crisis brought about by the war in Ukraine has increased borrowing and even helped more households with their energy bills. While Mr Sunak has pledged to have debt falling, there is no chance he will meet the manifesto pledge. Verdict missed. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine have left the pledges in tatters. Now that's true, you know, to a certain extent, but it's also about the way it's been handled as well. You know, one thing they've not mentioned in here as well is what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did when they were in power as well. Absolutely trashed the economy. Try not to remember that, do we? Health. The government swiftly ticked off many of its manifesto goals when it came to the NHS, including increasing funding for the service by $34 billion extra every year. A new NHS plan was introduced in 2020 as promised, but the impact of the pandemic has undone much of the government's plans. The manifesto pledged to increase staff morale, deliver an extra 6,000 in doctors in general practice, and improve A&E performances, while improving cancer survival rates, which appear doomed. Each of which appear doomed. Apologies. Meanwhile, plans to build 40 new hospitals by 2030 are also in doubt. That's not going to happen. We already know that. With the National Audit Office stating that just 11 projects would be completely new builds. The verdict is a miss. While some pledges were initially delivered, the pandemic brutally exposed the fragilities of the healthcare. Now, yes, but it's also important to remember, people, is that the National Healthcare Service was already suffering Christmas after Christmas after Christmas, winter after winter after winter, as due to the austerity that was taking place by the Conservative Party. The headlines and the media had reported it consistently during the Christmas period, and the funding and real terms pay was being taken away by doctors and nurses for over a long period, and which has resulted in doctors and nurses and whatnot, and those working within the NHS having to go on strike to demand better pay for themselves. So yes, while the government has invested more money in every year, the one thing it's not investing in is in its people, and they are also handing much of the National Healthcare Service to private contractors, to private businesses, and allowing them to run the NHS on behalf rather than the state running it themselves as well. The NHS is pretty much it's very much privatised. It's just a case of now being able to find a way to make charge people for it directly is what initially the Conservatives want to do in the end with it. Social care. The manifesto vowed to introduce social care reforms that would stand the test of time. While the reforms to the system were formulated, they ultimately broke a key promise that nobody needing care should be forced to sell their home to pay for it. Since coming to power, Mr Sunak has further delayed the introduction of social care reforms until 2025. He has shown little interest in addressing the issue ahead of the election. The verdict is a miss. The government puts forward reforms, but they have been delayed so far into the distance they now doubts they were being enacted. But they never cared about social care. It was just, again, I think it was just rhetoric talk. If they really cared about social care, they would have made some efforts towards it, and instead of kind of just letting it sit on the side there at this point. Immigration. The Tories have delivered on introducing an Australian-style points-based immigration system, but if voters believed that would lead to lower immigration, they were gravely mistaken. Tories' manifesto promised overall numbers would come down, while also ensuring that the British people are always in control. Instead, net migration stands at more than 600,000 for this year alone, while a record number of asylum seekers are crossing the Channel each year. Mr Sunak has made stopping the boats a key pledge of his, but just this week was unable to say whether the Channel migration crossing would be stopped by the election. Few believe overall migrant numbers will come down significantly next year. Verdict is a miss. Despite regaining control of immigration from the EU, net migration from outside Europe has ballooned. We lost control of our borders when we left the EU. We can't send people back that came across in France. You can't send them back unless you have a deal with them. We've made things worse. Immigration has skyrocketed has increased ever since then. Yes, there has been the war in Ukraine, the crisis in Sudan, conflicts still taking place in Africa. Migration is something that is always going to occur, and the increase and also because of climate change is also playing a factor with it, as well as war-torn countries as well are playing a factor into this. And our numbers are out of control, and their policy is just not working. It's just, but even Labour's proposals doesn't sound very promising either, to be fair. But it's frustrating. Education. The government is on track to provide 14 billion more funding to primary and secondary schools, but this has to be toppled with an additional 2 billion in revenue for the 2023-2024 and 2024-2025 as a result of higher inflation eating into the budget. The Department of Education continued to build more free schools. The verdict is a hit. After years of reforms, the school sector has largely been left alone by this government. Well, that can't be true, because we're having teacher strike, we're having kids not being able to feed themselves. We have, obviously, the pandemic has had an impact on schools. There's no question about that, and affected children's teaching. I don't think you can really argue that point. But to say that the government has done a lot for education, I'm not buying that. I would say maybe it's done for private, but from what I have family that are in teaching, and are they really telling me? And they're not telling me that schools have done fantastic. I'm not hearing that, so I don't know where this. I don't agree with this verdict whatsoever. Yes, they've invested more, but they haven't nowhere near invested the amount of money needed, and especially when you have stories of teachers literally begging for money to be able to buy certain things in order to keep teaching their children is absolutely disgusting as well. Crime and justice. While the government is on track to recruit 20,000 police officers lost to the force since 2010, Several policy goals remain at risk of being missed ahead of the next election. Chronic court backlogs mean the promise that anyone charged with knife possession must appear before magistrates in days, not weeks, and is unlikely to be met without major intervention. It's not enough magistrates. Again, austerity played a role in that. Similarly, the pledge to create 10,000 more prisons remains in doubt, with the Infrastructure and Project Authority given the plans an amber rating. A pledge to introduce a new victims law has faced a series of delays. With the Victims and Prisoner Bill only getting its second reading in March, it is likely it will be listed in the King's Speech in the autumn, but will be touch and go as to whether it will pass in time for the next election. The verdict is jury's out. The government has gone heavily on crime prevention, but the criminal justice system remains in disarray. Yeah, we had Baroness on strike, didn't we? We have, austerity has led to less courts, less when it comes to being putting them in front of a jury and all that kind of stuff. Is less of that now. Which means that cases are taking longer, and there's been reports, obviously, of cases where there's been no outcome, or crime has not gotten better. And this about 20,000 police officers. They took away 20,000 police officers, and they're recruiting 20,000 police officers, and they're claiming that they're recruiting 20,000 police officers, even though they initially took away 20,000 police officers, and people were keen to forget that. So to say that they've done well on crime and justice is not really, I'm not really buying that, really. More prison places, again, like, it's a definite not jury's out or fail, in my opinion, when it comes to that. Net zero in the environment. This one's definitely a failure. Under Boris Johnson, the Tories made decent headway on several environmental pledges to set out in the manifesto. A new Environmental Act has been passed, an Office for Environmental Protection has been established, and 640 million has been pumped into the Nature for Climate Fund. But Mr Sunak has signalled a retreat on net zero agenda, triggering an informal review into the full scale of policies. The fact that he's doing a U-turn and he's preparing to invest in oil and gas up north in Scotland tells you everything you need to know about his commitments when it comes to net zero in the environment. A pledge to plant 75,000 acres of trees every year was abandoned well before Mr Sunak took over. Well, that would have been a nice project to have done. But he has delayed flagship plans to reform plastic packaging recycling and scrap plans for a deposit return scheme. That would have been a really nice setup. That would have been, because you would then incentivise more people to do stuff, to do good. A host of animal welfare promises, including a ban on fur and new laws to prevent puppy smuggling and dog theft, have been dropped. Again, the verdict is jury's out. Much of the work carried out by Boris Johnson's leadership, but Mr Sunak has shown less appetite for the green agenda. He's not responded again. Tax. The government's main pledge not to raise the rate of income tax, VAT, and national insurance was missed. NI contributions were raised for many parts of the efforts to clear the NHS backlog post-pandemic, and then later to pay for social care reforms. And while income tax rates have not risen, salary thresholds have remained frozen. Meanwhile, millions more have been dragged into paying higher tax on their incomes. Verdict is dismissed. The UK's tax burden is at its highest since the 80s. Yeah, everyone paying more national contribution, including myself. I understand that, but it's not really. Is it really making a difference to the NHS backlog? You leave me in the comments section down below, because I don't believe it is. However, if I have to pay more national contribution, if it means making a better healthcare service, I'm prepared to do that. But obviously, some people can't afford to do that. But each to their own. But yeah, their handling of tax. Tax the rich. How many times have we heard that comment before? Transport. While some aspects of the manifesto has been delivered, such as plans for a minimum service level act, which came into law earlier this year, and the extension of tap and go ticketing, many of the bigger policy plans look highly unlikely to be achieved before the next election. The full Liverpool and Hull Northern Powerhouse rail was scrapped. That would have been making a massive difference for those up north. Although hopes still flicker it may survive, the government accepted the decision to press on with HS2, but Mr Sunak has since delayed it by several years. Major rail reforms under the Williams-Sharp rail review have yet to be enacted. Rail building plans remain largely on track. So, yeah, Northern Powerhouse, that all went down the gutter. may still carry on potentially. Labour may revive it in government if they win the next general election, but HS2, super expensive project, and it's been delayed by several years. It's just, yeah, not good at all. Verdicts, jury's out. Plans to uphold the creaking UK rail system remains in status while Mr Sunak insisted he will be on the side of motorists. He's only saying on the side of motorists because of what happened in the Uxbridge by-election with the whole ULEZ scheme. They want, the train companies want to take away ticket rail offices so that people can't talk to an actual person at a train station when they need help. I don't think that, and rail fares are sky high. It's insane. It's actually cheaper to fly than it is to take trains. That's how ridiculous it is. Housing. This one's without a doubt a failure. Ministers have effectively admitted they will miss their overaching housing target of building 3,000 homes by a year by mid-2020. However, the manifesto pledge of providing 1 million new homes over the course of this parliament is likely to be met. Rent reforms are well underway, such as the ban of no-fault evictions, while leasehold reforms have been delayed. But a new leasehold bill is expected in the autumn. The promise to end the blight of rough sleeping by the end of the pandemic looks doomed, while very much further planning reforms have been largely denuded. Again, not building nowhere near enough homes. The talk of ending rough sleeping, no, that's never going to happen. If they really cared about it, they would have done more for it. So this is not a surprise whatsoever, considering how high mortgages are, how high rent is up, because of the lack of housing. This is a result of the lack of homes being built. The verdict is jury's out. The Tories' housing pledge lacked ambition, but rental reforms have been welcomed. There is still much to do with time running out, however. No, it's just not going to happen. The last one, guys, levelling up. It may have been the flagship policy after Mr Johnson's tenure, but the manifesto struggled to define it. The document pledged to invest $100 billion in infrastructure and promised a new towns fund, which was delivered. Pots of levelling up money to regenerate areas have since been criticised, while the long-promised transport investment was not delivered on what many had hoped for. The verdict is a miss. Levelling up was the major yardstick in which this government would have been measured. It seems doubtful for those who voted Tory for the first time in 2019, but will feel better off by the election in 2024. Yeah, pretty damning article to say the least, guys. That is for sure. Dear. Well, I think I've covered as much as I can on that one, really, to be fair, guys. Don't forget, guys, if you can, hit the like button and share across social media if you can for me. It would be greatly appreciated. We'll dive straight into the next one, guys. Still got quite a lot to cover. This one is from Sky News. The India-UK trade deal held up by sticky issues as Trade Secretary visits Delhi. The UK and India are set to enter their 12th round of trade talks. Boris Johnson previously said their deal would be done by October 2022, while India is hopeful that negotiations will conclude by the end of 2023. Kemi Baganoff heads to India this week in hopes of making progress on a trade deal, but the government sources play down the prospect of an immediate breakthrough. A source told Sky News that tricky issues had not yet been resolved as the talks would enter their 12th round, almost a year after the deadline announced by Boris Johnson. We don't have anything to offer. That's the problem. They want. The thing is that they want the UK to issue more visas for Indians, but it goes against everything that the Conservatives stand for when it comes to being tough on immigration. So they can't. So they're kind of in a bind here, really. Government insiders said a full trade agreement being struck in time for Rishi Sunak's first official trip to India in September for the G20 summit is unlikely, despite passion on both sides. The India do want a trade deal. They do want a trade deal. It's about the deal, not the date. There are several outstanding issues, and you can't leave the really tricky stuff until the end, a UK government source had said. A breakthrough in talks is not impossible, insiders said, but after criticism from the Minister of the UK deal with Australia, they said officials are not working to a deadline. Yeah, they screwed up really bad with that Australian trade deal. Really bad for our farmers especially. They laugh at us, those in Australia, for the deal that they've got from the UK. We don't want to repeat with India if it can be helped, but with this government anything is possible. These difficult issues are understood to include relaxation of visa rules for Indian workers, as well as continued wrangling on trade standards. Mrs Baganoff will attend a meeting of G20 trade ministers in Japan and then head to Delhi to meet with the Industrial Minister Parskiv Goel. Apologies for mispronouncing the names. While in Delhi, she will also meet the chairman of Targa Group and Nukrukan Khosrokarian to discuss the company's investment in the UK to introduce the steelworks at Port Tablin in South Wales. A deal with India, which would be the largest bilateral post-Brexit trade deal with the UK, has struck, was one of Mrs. Bagnall's key priorities as Trade Secretary. Progress understood to have been made on agreements to reduce prohibition import stuff on cars and whisky and to open up opportunities to British firms. India is predicted to be the world's third largest economy by 2050, and the UK government's estimated in 2019 that a trade deal could be increased by UK's GDP by around 3.3 billion by 2035. MPs were critical of the announcement by Boris Johnson, who promised last April that a deal would be signed by the Diwali, an Indian autumn festival that occurred last year in October. The deadline has long passed. Mrs. Bagnall said in December, while embarking on an earlier round of negotiations, that an amazing deal was possible, but she had no plans to discuss if student visas were part of it. Time limit visas or for highly qualified workers were under discussion, she told a newspaper. Her trip last year was billed as a reset for negotiations. Home Secretary Suella Braverman was said to have set back the talks when she said in an interview last year that she had concerns about open border migration policy with India, and she pointed out the largest group of people who overstay their visas are Indian migrants. Way to blow any kind of trade deal when you start playing down a nation that wants more visas. That shows severe lack of communication in government between ministers right there when you make such comments like that. Speaking to Sky News, Labour's shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, said his party would not rule anything out when asked if they oppose bringing more visas given to India. They shouldn't rule it out. I don't think they should. Shadow Trade Secretary Nick Thomas said the Conservatives' record on trade negotiations have been to deliver bad deals or no deals at all. The commitment to delivering agreements with India and with the United States by the end of 2022 yet failed to meet their own deadlines. So then trumping the latest round of trade talks falls far short of the concrete action needed to get any deal across the line. Yeah, you remember we were supposed to have a big massive trade deal with the US when we left the EU. Where's that deal gone? India is a key partner for the UK. We have deep historical links and it's a fast growing economy, so Labour is committed to deepening our trade links. Mr Sunak's appointment as Prime Minister last year triggered great interest in India, with the TV station NDTV greeting it as an Indian sun rises over the empire. While both he and Narendra Modi are expected to face elections next year, a government source says that it was generally passionate on both sides for a deal to come together. Recent reports in India suggested that a deal is closer than UK officials say. Indian Commence Secretary Surinder Bahal claimed in the summer that it would be signalled well before the end of the year. It would be India's first free trade deal with a developed country. After an intern pact with Australia last year, long-running talks have been held with the US and EU on trade. The Department for Business and Trade spokesperson said the UK and India are both committed to working towards the best deal possible for both sides. We've made both good progress in closing chapters and are now laser focused on goods, service and investment. While we cannot comment on ongoing negotiations, we are clear that we will only sign what we have a deal that is fair, balanced and ultimately in the best interest of the British people and the economy. You would hope so. This sounds a lot more optimistic, obviously, than Australia, but I generally don't trust the I generally don't trust this current government for obvious reasons. You would hope that this deal turns out to be really good in the long term for both the United Kingdom and for India, but we will have to wait and see on that one, that is for sure, guys. I believe we have covered this story before, but I think it's worth reminding us a little bit about this one, guys. This one is, you haven't already heard this one, this will be a faithful reminder. So this is from the BBC. Rishi Sunak's inadvertently failed to declare childcare interest rules MP's watchdog. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has failed to declare his wife's financial interest in a child-minding agency correctly. The MP's watchdog has ruled. It's time for a water break for me. Daniel Greenberg, Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, said this arose out of confusion about the rules and was inadvertent. In a letter to Mr Greenberg, Mr Sunak said he accepted the ruling and apologised. The inquiry is now closed and the PM will not face further actions. Labour have said Mr Sunak's case is further evidence the process around declaring interest needs to be overhauled. A complaint was submitted to Mr Greenberg following Mr Sunak's appearance before MPs on the Commons Liaison Committee in March. During the session, the Prime Minister was questioned about his policy to provide payments to encourage people who became childminders. The cash would be doubted for those who signed up through six private childcare firms listed in the UK's government website, with the money being used to cover the firm's fees. Mr Sunak's wife, Astari Moti, was a shareholder in one of those private firms, Coral Kids, but when asked if he had any declarations to make, Mr Sunak said, "No, all my disclosures are declared in the normal way." Following an investigation, Mr Greenberg said he had concluded that Mr Murray's shareholding was a relevant interest and should have been declared to MPs. The Commissioner said that even if Mr Sunak had not been aware of the shareholding at the time that he appeared before the committee, he was aware of it when he wrote a letter to the committee chairman, Sir Brother Jenkins, to verify things, and should at that stage had declared it. Mr Sunak had recorded the shareholdings under arrangement for ministers to declare their interests. That records were not publicly declared but held by civil servants. Some of these interests are made public on the list of ministers' interests. The independent advisor on ministers' interests advised on which interest needs to be included in this publicly available list. Mr Sunak said 3 independent advisors told him that his wife's shareholdings did not need to be added. Well, obviously these advisors did not know what they were talking about, clearly. Mr Greenberg said he accepted Mr Sunak, believing that by registering the interest he had complied with his obligations and so did not declare it in his letter to Sir Bernard Jenkins. He added that Mr Sunak had confused the concept of registration with the concept of declaration, and so the failure to declare arose out of this confusion and was accordingly inadvertently on the part of Mr Sunak. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to declare it." It's such a mickey taker, doesn't it? It feels like such a mickey taker from such a very wealthy man. Mr Greenberg said he was concluding his inquiry by using what he called the revatication procedure, a process used to correct minor failures to declare interest. Basically, they're letting them go. It means the Commissioner stops short of submitting a full report to MPs on the Commons Committee on Standards and Privilege for them to consider any possible further action. Replying to Mr Greenberg, Mr Sunak said during the Liaison Committee hearing he had no idea of the connection between Coral Kids and his government's childcare policy. He's lying, isn't he? Allegedly. It was the only after the hearing that I became aware of the link, as set out by my subsequent letter to Sir Bernard, chair of the Liaison Committee. I now understand my letter to Sir Bernard was not sufficiently expansive regarding declarations at distance from resignation, in brackets. On reflection, I accept your opinion and I should have used that letter to declare the interest explicitly. I apologise for these inadvertent errors and confirm acceptance of your proposal for recertification. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said this is further evidence that the system needs a full overhaul. Labour promised to set up an Ethics and Integrity Commission with greater powers to launch investigations to determine whether parliamentary rules have been broken if they are elected. Essentially, he got away with it, I think it's fair to say. And to be fair, he's Prime Minister. And it's... I think if he was maybe if he was just an MP, maybe it would have been different. I don't know. Maybe as a minister would have been more damning. But this feels like it's just been shoved under the carpet, sort of thing, to kind of just brush it aside and try not to get people talking about it, because they don't really want people talking. Excuse me, too much about it. To be fair. Yeah. While you guys are here, obviously, thank you very much for continuing to watch. I've still got a few more articles we're going to go through. If you can, hit the like button and share across social media platforms, it would be greatly appreciated. It really does help support the channel, guys. Next on Newsround, this from the Independent. Priti Patel apologises to the King for causing embarrassment after email about Prince Andrew. She reportedly sent an email to Charles's principal private secretary, Sir Clive Alderson. What's this about, huh? The ex-Home Secretary, Dame. Do we have to call her Dame? Do I have to call her Dame, guys? I'm going to stop and drink water while I think about that for 1 second. No. Ex-Home Secretary Priti Patel has apologised to the King for causing embarrassment and difficulties after reportedly sending an email suggesting a review of the Duke of York's armed security. According to reports, Andrew no longer has taxpayer-funded police protection after giving up his HRH style amid the future furlough over his association with philanthropic financier Jeffrey Epstein and the out-of-court settlement in the US civil sex case. The Sun newspaper reported Priti Patel emailed Charles's principal private secretary, Sir Clive Alderson, suggesting a review of the Duke's protection could be considered. She also referred to the Duke's social security details in a leaked email, the paper said. Why would she do that? Priti Patel told the newspaper, "It is disappointing that this correspondence has been leaked to the public domain, and I apologise to His Majesty for the embarrassment and difficulty the publishing of this correspondence has caused." Prince Andrew stepped away from public life after a controversial Newsnight interview in November 2019. Virginia Goffard also sued him for allegedly sexually assaulting her when she was 17 and was trafficked by Epstein. Andrew has always denied the claims but paid millions of pounds in an out-of-court settlement in the US civil case. In January 2022, ahead of his legal settlement, his mother, the Queen, stripped Andrew of all his honorary military roles, including Colonel of Grenadier Guards. He gave up his HRH style. Buckingham Palace, Priti Patel and the Conservative Party have been approached for comment, and there has been no answer. Ooh. Why is Priti Patel doing this? Interesting to say the least, that is for sure, but a small little one. Food for thought, that is for sure. Yeah, why is Andrew still walking about? Why has he not been thrown behind bars? Oh, that's right, it's because he's part of the royal family, so he can get away with it, can't he, guys? Yeah, that's an interesting one to say the least, guys. This next one we have is an interesting one. I'm interested to hear what the Labour people have to say regarding this one. Interesting to say the least. So this one is from Open Democracy. The headline is Labour's conference set to host weapons manufacturer and spyware firm. Boateng, Platinar and Babcock listed as sponsors for fringe event run by New Statement Media Group. Platinar is a dangerous organisation. They are a US firm, spyware firm, and they have links to the CIA. There was an article by Open Democracy providing that as well. So I don't like that at all. It's quite worrying, to be fair. So weapons manufacturers, fossil fuel companies and a spyware firm were among those sponsoring events at this year's Labour Party conference. No, not a union instead. Boeing and Babcock, manufacturers of missile or missile compartments, and Platinar, a controversial spyware firm funded by the CIA, will sponsor fringe events hosted by the centre-left media company, the New Statesman Media Group. So why are they getting it? What's the... This does not feel right. Fossil fuel companies, private health firms, major banks and the international airlines groups, which owns British Airways, are also among those paying to have a presence at the party's annual conference in Liverpool, which will host politicians and policy makers. You can't tell me that something's not fishy here. Now, obviously, an argument will be, well, it's perfectly natural to have some of these organisations here. Okay, maybe some of them, but why would you want a controversial spyware firm that's been funded by the CIA there? Why would you want fossil fuel companies there when you're supposed to be trying to be changing, when you're supposed to be going for green? Just putting that out there. The party has been slammed for playing host to these industries by environmental groups and anti-weapon groups. Those who call the sponsorship disgusting and disappointing. Its own MP Clive Lewis has also questioned why Labour is cozying up to some of the organisations involved. This is about pushing. This allegedly feels like about pushing out trade unions and having more donors instead. That's what it's starting to feel like to me. But you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below if you don't think that's the case, because that's certainly the picture that's being painted here by these sponsors. The events announced today boast the Labour Party's biggest names and the most exciting talents and cover subjects such as the move to net zero, the housing crisis and healthcare. Speakers include the Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeling, as well as Labour's chair of the Levelling Up Committee, Clive Betts, and Deputy London Mayor Tom Copley. UK-based Babcock, which has arms deals with the government and has recently signed a deal with Israeli Aerospace Industries, the IAI, will sponsor a talk in style sovereign capability, how we can make, buy and sell British. Speaking on the panel of Babcock's Chief Correspondent Affairs Officer John Howie, alongside Labour Shadow Minister for Defence Procurement Chris Evans, and the party's Shadow International Trade Minister Nia Griffith. It just doesn't feel right at all, does it? This doesn't feel like a Labour party that you really want to support. Spyware firm Platinum, whose owners have donated to Donald Trump's political campaign, will sponsor a talk on Ukraine called How We Can Hold Aggressors Accountable for War Crimes and Deter Future Conflict. These are guys who've donated to Donald Trump's campaign. This executive vice president of the UK and Europe will appear on the panel. Platinum, which has built software to support drone strikes and immigration raids, is tipped to win a £480 million deal this year to build a single database that will eventually hold all the data in the NHS. See, Open Democracy are saying this, but apparently people have claimed that this bit about them holding all the data in the NHS is apparently not true. Well, they just said it there. Energy companies SSE, which has been accused of misleading the public over green investments, is sponsoring delivering a net zero talks. Its own managing director of corporate affairs, regulation and strategy will speak on the panel. Carlton Gas will sponsor an event entitled How Can the Energy Sector Support Customers on a Journey to Net Zero? Its Chief Strategy and Regulations Officer will also speak on the panel. Do you think they really want to care about net zero? Other events at next month's conference will be sponsored by companies such as Offshore Energy UK, formerly known as Oil and Gas UK, National Gas, Oval Energy and Housing developer Taylor Wimpey. Clive Lewis told Open Democracy that people want change under a Labour government, and hosting some of these firms signalled that there are some palms that are going to be greased. I do not think that organisations like Platinum and others are necessarily the kind of organisations that Labour in the years before a general election should be cozying up to, said Lewis. I think they should be saying, look, we deal with you, but frankly, some of you are part of the problem. I think it's entirely possible to be on the side of entrepreneurs without necessarily having to get in bed with big oil companies. Big corporations like the likes of Platinum and the Labour Party should be clear about that. He added, I think there are questions for the New Statesman and why they are accepting sponsorship and funding from some of these ethnically and morality questionable corporations. Campaigners against the arms industry have condemned the decision to allow weapon manufacturers to have presence at a conference. I agree. Why would you want to allow weapons manufacturer at a conference when we don't even? It just doesn't feel right at all. It is disgusting and disappointing to hear that the arms companies will be sponsoring talks at a Labour Party conference. Amy Apra, media coordinator at the Campaign Against Arms Tech, DCAAT, told Open Democracy these companies should not be given its legitimacy or the opportunity to lobby policymakers in order to continue making profits for their shareholders and from a deadly trade that causes destruction and misery around the world. She added, accepting sponsorship from these companies sends a bleak message to anyone thinking a future Labour government will adopt any kind of ethical stance towards the arms trade. Couldn't agree more. I agree. Environmental groups have also spoken out, warning Labour against forming relationships with oil and gas companies. There's been an argument that they should cozy up to them in order to get things done. I know, but there has been that argument from people who back Labour. The fossil fuel lobby is no stranger to cozying up with policymakers. They've had a lot of success and making a lot of cash from doing so in the past. Greenpeace UK's policy director Doug Parr told Open Democracy. But Labour must not make the same cosy mistakes as the Conservatives by giving these self-catering climate wreckers the opportunity to launder their political reputation. The next government must have bold policies and a strong commitment to tackle the climate crisis, not another one that ends up in the back of pockets of polluters and dodgy operators. It is not the first time that New Statesman Media Group has faced criticism for its choice of sponsors at the Labour Party events. Last year, protesters disrupted a sponsored talk by oil company Drax, which has been accused of polluting major black areas in the US. The New Statesman's events are advertising a partnership with the media companies as an opportunity to showcase your brand, generate leads, nurture relationships with policymakers and politicians. It also hosts private roundtable events which are not publicly advertised, which Open Democracy understand can cost the sponsor over £15,000. Open Democracy has approached the Labour Party and New Statesman media group for a comment. What a surprise, guys. There's been no response. What do you guys think of that? I just think it's so fishy, so dodgy when you think about weapons manufacturers, oil companies, oil and gas companies, spyware firm, all being a part of this Labour conference. Way too cozying up for me, guys. It's way too cozying up for me. But we're almost at the end of the news round, guys. So if you can, don't forget to hit the like button if you can, and share across social media if you can, guys. The last one we have for you guys is from Byline Times. We've talked about this before, but I also think it's a bit of this is a bit of an updated one to it, so it's not too long yet for you guys. Fake newspapers sent by political parties should be banned, voters say. 2/3 of Conservative voters also want the tactic currently being pushed by Rishi Sunak's party to be outlawed. This I 100% agree. So you can see here all these fake newspapers that they've been using. The vast I'm using the wrong camera, guys. My apologies. There we go. Let me start again. The vast majority of voters believe fake newspapers being promised by political parties, sometimes without being made clear who they are from, should be banned. Byline Times have been investigating the deluge of political political leaflets being dressed up as a local newspaper, issued by Conservative Party HQ to marginal parliamentary seats across the country. Often the imprint of legal requirement for election material setting out those who printing and promoting the flyers is in tiny writing and in grey at the bottom of the page, while the name of the Conservative Party is not mentioned. Of course, they don't want to mention the Conservative Party because it's poisonous right now, and it's not very well liked yet by people. Readers have responded with anger. One wrote, "Many people will be fooled by this, especially older people, who I imagine will tend to read the local newspapers are also less likely to notice the microscope small prints in hard-to-find places." Another branded it Tory marketing deliberately disgusting as independent news, while one recipient dubbed it as dirty tricks campaigning. The ruse has been previously condemned by industry body the News Media Association, among other press groups. Now, executive polling for Byline Times by independent pollsters Omnibus has found that 62% of Britons think that fake newspaper tactics should be banned if they do not make clear which party is behind it. As I've said, I think I've said about this before, that they should make the fonts for the parties that they are representing much bigger in the context of it, in my opinion, and it should be much clearer that people know this is the person who's representing this political party. People have a right to know very clearly what party you are representing, whether you are independent, Conservative, Labour, whatever it is. People have a right to know. The figure rises to 65% amongst Conservative voters, the same as Labour voters. Liberal Democrats, who have also been known to use fake newspapers for election materials, are less in favour of a ban of 55%. The figure rises significantly amongst over 75s, some of whom may be more vulnerable to misleading campaign materials. 75% back a ban on the practice, and opposition sits at 71% with almost no formal qualifications. Byline Times has asked the Conservative Party why it is mimicking sometimes defunded local newspapers for party political purpose. We have still not received a response, but the Somerset County Gazette was told by the party that one local leaflet was clearly marked as being political material, and it complies with the relevant electoral rules and regulations. As I've said about this in a video, guys, it's not in breach of the rules, so they can do it, and that's the problem. The rules need to be changed on it. So the Electoral Commission can't do anything about it. Earlier this week, the newspaper reported that voters had been posting back fake pink newspapers sent by the Conservative Party to their head office in a bid to cost the party in postage fees. One voter told Byline Times they had posted approximately half a kilogram of takeaway menus and junk emails to CCHQ from a post box nowhere near my house, with a handwritten note saying, "No more fake news, please." It was enough weight, 250 grams, to count as a parcel, so in theory they should get priority treatment from the Royal Mail. Nice jib there. The Conservative campaign tactics were branded appalling by one of Britain's most renowned photojournalists after imitating a shuttered local newspaper to garner voters. The tactic of publishing fake papers was used successfully in Uxbridge and South Ruislip last month, with the party's Uxbridge and South Ruislip people urging people to stop the ULEZ The Labour London Mayor Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emission zone expansion. The fake magazine mirrored the title of the local council-run Hillington People, which is meant to be apolitical. It comes as spokesperson for the Electoral Commission told by Iron Times that, generally speaking, electoral materials require the name and address of the printer and the promoter. But it came with a caveat that we are not currently in the official election period. The spokesperson added, the candidate in print rules do not apply yet. As the general election has not been announced yet, there is no candidates as such. Someone can only officially become a candidate when the UK Parliament is dissolved. That means we are currently in a campaign wet wild where fake newspapers can be put out by political parties even without saying who's published them. We encourage all parties to campaign into including printing on all materials to provide voters with transparency, said the Electoral Commissioner figure. But again, they can't do anything about it, guys, that's the problem. Spokesperson for the Electoral Commission also previously told this newspaper that there are no rules against the parties imitating local newspapers or from hiding from their party's name in party political materials. However, the watchdog has previously condemned the practice. Meanwhile, Conservatives face an intellectual property theft row after the Derbyshire Conservative MP Robert Regan MP distributed a newspaper titled The High Peak Reporter, despite the name of the title being owned by an actual newspaper group. Chris Birds owns Quest Media Network, which itself owns the brand. The title High Peak Reporter told the prolific North outlet, I guess it should be fitting that we should be flattered by this stuff. But we are not. Would Mr. Langer have tried to do this with the Daily Mirror or Daily Telegraph? Absolutely not, because that would have cost him and his party a lot of money for a blatant breach. The newspaper group, which includes the Tameside Reporter, Gossip Chronicle and Oldham Reporter in its portfolio, has been publishing for 167 years, the title reported. Dr. Mike Manoli, OBE, one of the UK's most decorated photographers and Lincolnites, who began his career in the Royal Lincoln Chronicle in 1970, told Byline Times last week that fake newspapers was a typical of politicians, and he added that it represented the idea of never letting the facts interfere with a good story. Over 1,300 GB adults were polled online by Ominous in 22nd of August 2023. Answers were weighed in to make the results representative of the demographics of the British public. And that, guys, is... oh my god, 1 second. I have hit the wrong button there. And that, guys, that is your news round for the week on Friday night. I hope you guys found these stories fascinating. What did you guys make of them? Let me know down in the comments below. Some interesting stories, to say the least, that is for sure. But as always, I always appreciate any feedback as well on them, guys. Just before you go, just remember, if you can hit the like button, it would be greatly appreciated, and share across social media. Thank you very much if you've watched all the way through. It's greatly appreciated. Take care and have a great weekend. Goodbye.